Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was one of my first Diablo-like ARPG games, and to this day it remains one of my favorite games of all time. Not because of its deep story or its complex mechanics, but because of its smooth and fast action, great atmosphere, and addictive gameplay. But what if I wanted to take it outside, where people could judge me and laugh at me for sitting on a bench playing video games? Then I'd have to whip out my trusty Game Boy Advance and enjoy Dark Alliance port for the system. Now, you're probably wondering, how the hell is this gonna work? The GBA can barely do 3D, let alone emulate PS2 graphics. Well, you'd be surprised to hear that Dark Alliance on the GBA is actually a very faithful adaptation of the classic PS2 original. Even though it's a scaled-down port for an underpowered system, it retains all the magic elements that made the PS2 version a beloved game. Let's check it out. Since this is a port and not an entirely new spin-off, the story of the game remains basically unchanged. You enter Baldur's Gate, get mugged almost immediately, and then have to uncover a plot that threatens the entire world's future. Pretty standard stuff. Of course, many things have been trimmed down to accommodate for the system's hardware, so say goodbye to proper video cutscenes. Instead, you'll enjoy static images in their full 16-bit glory, and lots of dialogue boxes. Unfortunately, that means that many cutscenes that fleshed out the story a bit more have been omitted, such as Karn's discussion with Xantam, but the basic gist of the story and all the main plot points are still there, so you're not missing that much. Not that anyone plays these games for the intricate story, but what can you do? Dark Alliance is a classic ARPG, which means a few things. An isometric perspective, a zoomed out camera, and tons of enemies rendered and ready to tear you apart. The GBA port implements the isometric view rather beautifully, using sprites rendered from multiple angles to simulate the game's 3D depth without it actually being a proper 3D game. The result is quite impressive, and you'll enjoy detailed pixelated graphics, at least for the GBA, and wonderfully crafted sprites with surprisingly smooth animations. Unfortunately, the game's much brighter than the original one, and the lighting is static, as to be expected, resulting in environments that lack the original's dark and foreboding atmosphere. Despite that minor hiccup though, Dark Alliance's graphics invoke a very nostalgic and comforting feel, at least to me they do. The combination of the chunky pixels and the bright colors make me feel like I'm sitting by my fireplace, reading an epic Dungeons and Dragons tale. Well, I don't really have a fireplace, but a boy can dream. As for the music, there is none. Okay, fine, there are some short snippets that play during important moments like entering a new area or fighting a boss, but they're either ambient sounds or incredibly short orchestral loops. Nothing really exciting, to be honest. Most of the game is dead silent and you'll be accompanied by basic combat sound effects and yells during your adventure. It almost makes for a contemplative experience. Slaying the same pixelated blobs over and over really gets my third eye going. Anyway, Dark Alliance's port has some minor setbacks, and there are some cut corners for sure, but it still manages to capture the original's atmosphere and present its story in a somewhat unique way. So, the story remains intact, the presentation is as good as it can possibly be. What about the gameplay? It's surprisingly decent, despite the GBA's limitations. First of all, the controls. Since the GBA doesn't have an analog stick, your movement is limited to the basic 8 directions provided by the system's D-pad, which is fine. The enemies move the same way, so you're not really at a disadvantage, and the game is really lenient regarding enemy collisions, at least in melee combat. We'll get to that in a second. When the game starts, you can choose from 3 different classes: Fighter, Wizard, and Archer. Unfortunately, the different characters from the original are gone, so you're pretty much stuck with a boring human wearing different tunics to match his profession. Thankfully though, all the classic character stats are still here, and most of the role-playing and customization options have survived the downscaling, allowing you to increase your stats and spend skill points on various abilities or passive traits, just like in the PS2 version. Equipment-wise, the game is on par with the original, and you have a large variety of different one-handed and two-handed weapons to choose from, such as swords, axes, warhammers, and bows. And of course, there is plenty of armor, shields, rings, and amulets to find. You can also find enchanted weapons with different properties, such as ice or poison, and you can actually see your enemies freeze and shatter from a successful blow, which impressed the hell out of me. There are no combo attacks though, so you're stuck with a single strike as far as melee combat goes. As for ranged combat, it's kind of finicky and takes some time getting used to. There is a short delay between each attack, to simulate the pull and release of the arrow, I suppose, and since you can only use 8 directions to aim your shot, you have to align yourself properly, which is hard to do given the game's isometric perspective and the fact that your enemies never stop moving. Fortunately, they're not the brightest and can be easily outmaneuvered or cheesed by exiting and re-entering their limited aggro range. Sometimes you're gonna have to play dirty, because the game doesn't really play fair either. Even though you won't be fighting as many enemies as the PS2 version, they can drain your entire health bar in only a few hits, sometimes in just one, if they feel like it. You also don't have the option of recalling back to town, so you have to plan accordingly and load up on those health potions before venturing out in the open, which fortunately isn't that much of a big deal since the dungeons are pretty short. It actually adds an element of strategy and planning, which I thought was pretty cool. What I didn't find very cool though was how the dungeons themselves were structured. Thanks to the graphics making everything look the same, and the game's obsession with backtracking and going back and forth unlocking doors and finding items, it is incredibly easy to get lost. There is no minimap to help you either, so good luck finding your way out, especially when you can barely see where your path is. I understand, however, sacrifices need to be made to fit such a game in a handheld system, even though it pains me greatly to see some dungeons being cut from the game entirely, such as the Undead Crypt. It makes sense from a development standpoint to condense and repurpose less significant plot threads to better accommodate the gameplay and the GBA's limitations. It's still a bummer though not being able to enjoy the game to its fullest potential. Even so, Dark Alliance on the GBA is still a spectacular experience and manages to encapsulate what made the original unique and enjoyable. The combat is fun and snappy, the gameplay loop is addictive, and all of your customization and role-playing options are intact, with barely any compromises made. Sure, the enemies are dumb, and dungeon navigation is annoying, but overall, it's just as fun as the original. It's crazy to imagine a GBA port being as good as the PS2 original version, but Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance managed to do just that, which was super surprising in the best way possible. It manages to keep the game's core intact, using the GBA's limitations to its advantage, providing beautiful pixel graphics, a nostalgic atmosphere, and an insanely fun gameplay loop. Sure, not everything is perfect. The lack of music and quality of life features such as a minimap or the ability to recall back to town were jarring and annoyed me quite a bit, especially because the dungeons themselves were confusing and filled with enemies that could easily one-shot you. But if you manage to overlook these slight drawbacks, you'll enjoy a wonderful little game that is just as good as the original, and portable as well. And that's all I had to say about Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance on the Game Boy Advance. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like if you did, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stuff. You know how it goes. Have a great day, and until next time, take care and have fun.